So yeah, this is the current level of battle reports that I'm doing on my channel. Here we go. Ready? Yeah, subscribe for some more of that. Hello and welcome to painting Kings of War 2-player starter set Shadows in the North, Part 5, Snow Trolls. So just like our first video when we painted the butchers, these guys are made from Mantic's Restic. I was just pointing out with a knife there, there's a really bad bit where the legs glue onto the body. You have to cut away a piece of the belt. They're just not particularly well designed where they come together basically. They need a fair bit of scraping and cutting with the X-Acto knife to clear off mould lines. Not as easy as a proper hard plastic miniature. So the model's been primed with Vallejo Surface Primer Grey, polyurethane primer. It's very light grey, and just given it an overall dry brush with a dead white paint. Got a nice homemade bright blue contrast paint here, mixing Vallejo Gaming Blue and Citadel Contrast Medium. It's about 1 part ink to 3 or 4 parts contrast medium. It's going to make a real nice vibrant blue. Just wiping a little bit of excess water off my brush there. Just going to paint over all the fur areas. Using it like a contrast paint basically, kind of like a heavy glaze or a wash. Speed this up here just to get all this covered. Trying to avoid the claws because they're going to be a claw colour basically. Yeah, this goes on really well. Really enjoyed painting this. Took my time, made sure I didn't get too much of it on the straps, the rock he's holding, and the armour pieces. Using this method where we're basically using contrast paints, a sort of Zenithal undercoat. There's a little bit lighter from above with that white dry brush. Means we don't want to get the blue paint on the areas that we're going to use other contrast paints on top of. Really speeding this up now, so it's not, this fast speed's a bit too fast really to kind of see how I'm applying paint, but you can see where I'm applying it. When the model's dry, going in with a second coat, a bit thinner this time, not letting it flow off my brush like a wash, just sort of glazing in underneath some of the muscles just to make it a little bit darker. You can see the first pass, which I did as like a heavy glaze / wash. And I've already did a good job of just defining some of those muscle areas. Mainly putting it on the underside of the muscles, or where there's muscles underneath the fur, just to provide a bit more shadow really, using the same mix. Going in with a reasonably thin white paint here. The model colour white is not super thick. Just covering up some of the areas where I did splatter a bit of blue onto the parts of the model which aren't meant to be blue. You can see the blue fur though, it's already looking pretty good. You know, if you wanted a really quick tabletop job, that kind of looks alright, I reckon. So using the Citadel Wildwood here, I really love this colour for a base for brass. Brass or copper, any kind of dark metal really, also for like a rusty steel. Really goes onto the model nicely, this colour. See, I'm just using my big size 6 synthetic brush, just being careful. I wasn't careful enough really. I did get a couple of very small patches of this wildwood onto the blue fur, which I don't notice until it's dried, which is a bit of a pain. If you notice it when it's still wet, just quickly mop it up with a wet brush. Always keep a wet brush handy when I'm painting. Yeah, just being really careful here because I know that the cloth underneath is going to be sort of yellow or orange. I don't want this dark brown on that cloth, and I also don't want it to go mad and sort of go all over the back of his fur. Decided on this guy to paint the club in the same colour. Like I said in some of the other videos, you know, the idea is to get these guys painted. Now, like the butchers, the snow trolls are your monstrous infantry, so do want to spend a bit longer on them. But the idea of the channel and this project in particular is to sort of paint these guys in steps to different standards. So firstly, getting these contrast paints on, and if I had wanted to, I could have just left them like that and they would have been fine to base up, play some games with, and then maybe go back in and highlight afterwards. In the end, I didn't do that. I have actually painted the whole model. Mixing some Agaros dunes here. Citadel contrast paint Agaros dunes with a little bit of Vallejo Gaming red, just to make a sort of more orangey colour. It's a little bit glossy, so we'll need to give a satin or a matte varnish across the whole model afterwards just to even it out. It can provide quite a cool effect actually, having glossy areas and matte areas, but only if you're intending it. Like, I wouldn't have a cloth area like this being particularly glossy. That wouldn't be my sort of personal choice. You can see just using a really big brush here, just trying to be careful, letting the contrast paint sort of flow off the brush rather than painting it onto the model. Yeah, got to be particularly careful around there under the arm. So this is about 6 speed now, and you know, it's still taking a little while because all of the contrast paints are meant to be really easy to go on. It does still take a while if you want to be careful. Snakebite leather now, really brilliant paint. I'm really warming to this. I like it a lot. The Agaros Dunes was probably my favourite when I started, but Snakebite leather has maybe taken that title. Yeah, big fat brush here with a bit of a fish hook on the end, but I know which way the brush fish hooks, so I can still use it to guide the paint along the edge of the belt there, the strap I should say. So although it's a big brush with very diluted paint, because the contrast paint is very diluted, you can still get a lot of control if you're careful. You can sort of see that the contrast paint is sitting in only about half of the bristles, you know, the tip end of the bristles. It's not flooding the whole belly of the brush. Messed up a bit there, you can see. Dropped a little bit too much in there. Not too worried about it because it's underneath, so it'll just kind of add to the shadow underneath the belt. Yeah, this Snakebite leather is great as a contrast paint. You really can just put it on quite heavily and then you could just leave it like that. Just being careful not to get any of that on his chest. Just using Agaros Dunes there on his clothing. Just to separate the colours from the other cloth that I did in that more orangey colour. So yeah, here we go, this is what we've got so far. Using a bit of Black Templar now, just to go over the areas that are going to be painted silver. You can see sort of the way I'm holding my hands there. I'm trying to be really careful. Gone down to using like a size 4 brush here because I want to be a bit more careful. To be honest, I probably shouldn't have bothered trying to stick with the contrast paints for this. For a small area like that, I should have just painted it with, you know, like a Vallejo black or Abaddon black. Would have had a bit more control with that. See, I'm concentrating quite hard because my head's getting in the way. It means I'm leaning over the model more. Decided to just go back in with snakebite leather on the straps around the club. Don't want a huge variety of colours on these snow trolls. I want them to fit in with the Clansman that I've already painted, so, you know, lots of leathery, yellowy, browny colours. Contrast well with the blue fur. Skeleton Horde contrast paint straight out the pot now onto the claws. Line is quite thin, so it will need a couple of coats. Just being careful not to get it on the skin, but other than that, just putting it on. Yeah, I decided that these parts of the clothing weren't particularly vibrant enough, so just putting another layer on. Back in with the Skeleton Horde, just over those claws, pushing it more towards where the claw meets the fur areas, so sort of leaving the tips of the claws a little bit lighter. Just a quick, easy way to get a bit of colour transition on the claws before you do any highlighting. Mixing a bit of Vallejo Game Ink Red into the blue mix from earlier to provide a nice purple colour. Could have just used Magos Purple, but I wanted to use the blue ink that I already had on the palette. Using it to add some warmth to the shadows. Do a couple of things with this actually. Use it to add some warmth to the shadows, but then I also use it to glaze over some of the muscles, elbows, knees, the hands, and also around the face, just to provide some interest so that the skin's not all just the blue colour. I think it works quite well, but, you know, might not be to everyone's taste. You can see at this point I've already painted his lips with the purple colour as well. They stand out a bit too much just against the blue of the face, but when we go back in and put a bit of this glaze over the face, it doesn't stand out quite so much like he's wearing lipstick. Yeah, just painting the icy spikes on the club with exactly the same mix as I've used on his skin. It's fur. So yeah, this is the current level of battle reports that I'm doing on my channel. Here we go. Ready? Yeah, subscribe for some more of that. Nah, I do plan to do some, not battle reports, but I do plan to sort of showcase a little bit of playing the game once I've painted the whole setup. It won't really be a proper battle report though. Using an old brush here with the Hashut copper. Kind of like an overbrush dry brush, not a real dry brush. There's a reasonable bit of paint on the brush. Using an old one though, so that, you know, it doesn't matter that the end's all knackered on it. It's perfect for this, and you can see on the shoulder pads the detail is really well defined, so perfect for an overbrush. You know, if you want to spend a lot longer on these models, you could paint different parts of the metal, different metallic colours, maybe some actual gold in there. I do use a bit of silver, but it's mainly to highlight the copper. What I'm doing here is painting those rings that are holding the straps together, just painting those silver to provide a bit of contrast to the other metals. Getting my head in the way again because I'm trying to be careful, leaning over the model. Yeah, mixing some silver into the copper. You can see me spread it on my thumb there. It's a lot lighter, a lot brighter as well. Yeah, a bit too much on there. Take a bit off. Just highlighting this now. Adding the brightest silver there to the mix. Just doing it straight on the towel. It's not exactly a dry brush, like I said, but kind of a dry brush, so it doesn't need to be on the wet palette. In fact, you definitely don't want it on the wet palette. You want it reasonably dry. Just picking out some of the more finer detail areas here. You can sort of see I'm always doing it from the top downwards, because the light would be striking from above. Highlighting the points of the armour now. Yeah, so here we go. That's what we've got so far. Yeah, he's looking pretty good. I think he's looking pretty good anyway. The club looks a bit ratty at the moment still, but that's because it hasn't had much work done it. So dry brushing with a big fat makeup brush here. Straight white paint, just highlighting the fur. You're probably thinking I should have done this earlier, and you're probably right. I should have started this before I painted the metallics and some of the other areas. I'm not quite sure why I didn't. But anyway, just, you know, being careful with the dry brush here, and it's fine. Kind of helps blend in some of those areas where I've used the purple glaze. So I'm calling this dry brushing, but I do make sure that the bristles on that dry brush is basically a makeup brush. I do make sure that the bristles are very, 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 very slightly damp. It kind of helps get a chalky effect from the dry brush. I might do a review of these makeup brushes at some point, but I can tell you straight away they're not as good as a proper decent brush. Not these ones that I've got anyway. When they work to start with, over sort of, you know, 3 or 4 models, maybe doing what I'm doing here over 3 or 4 models, they're brilliant. I think they're probably on a par with some of the more expensive ones you buy, but the bristles start falling out quite quickly out of that. You know, you wouldn't expect that from a proper dry brush. Yeah, you can see the extra highlighting on the guy on the left there. Really makes a difference. I like it a lot better like that. A couple of my favourite Vallejo colours here. Scrofulous Brown and Elphic Flesh. Scrofulous Brown's a lovely, lovely orangey colour. Using a fine detail brush now, and the paint is reasonably thick. It's not meant to be super thin. Just very carefully adding some scratches to the leather. This is really a step above tabletop quality, I guess. But then there's not a huge amount of detail on this model. The leather straps is an area where you can make some quick wins if you want to spend, I don't know, 10 minutes going in, adding some scratches to the leather. Just adding a little bit more Elphic Flesh to the mix as I go along, provide some slightly lighter scratches at various points on the leather. Kind of making the scratches go back and forward, focusing on areas that I think would be worn. Using exactly the same mix on the black strap at the top. I'm going to tie all this in with a glaze in a minute. My favourite bit of paint in the whole model, actually. Scale colour, intensity range, chestnut ink. This stuff is magic. I love it. There we go. Thin down a bit. Kind of like a glaze. You can see that on my thumb there. Yeah, love this. Yeah, look at that. Instant leather. Looks fantastic. Yeah, warms up that leather really beautifully. Blends in all those scratches. You can see where I did the dry brush as well. The top of the straps got caught with the white paint. Adding this glaze over the top really ties it all back in together, making a really, really lovely warm leather colour. I really like it. I also use this ink over the black strap just to make it a little bit warmer, a little bit more leathery rather than just black. You know, you often say for some of these sort of more centerpiece models, yeah, faces, shields, bases. In this case, this guy hasn't got a shield, but I'm kind of treating the leather straps as one of the standout elements of the model. Yeah, really pleased with that. Just using some of the elfic flesh to highlight the teeth, just normal layering. Tiny little bit thinned down, but not much. Painting towards the tip of the teeth, leaving the gums kind of a bit more grotty and yellowy. Don't want to over highlight the teeth on these monstrous infantry models. You know, they're not going to have really nice bright white teeth in real life. Just quickly jump back a step here and cover how we painted the rock. Using some black Templar to highlight the cracks in the rock. Accentuate the cracks in the rock by putting shadows in. Yeah, you can see I'm struggling with that size 6 brush, so I'm going to go with a smaller brush. Wipe that off first. Using some of the black Templar, almost like a pin highlight here, just trying to get in the grooves, and then also at the same time using it as a glaze just to add a bit of contrast to some of the indents that are already moulded into the rock. Adding a bit more shade sort of closer to the hand where you'd expect it to be in a bit of shadow because his hand's sort of grabbing hold of the rock. Try not to hold the model quite like this usually, but you know, just keep your fingers off the paint job, but a bit tricky to get to that bit while still holding the cork that I had him mounted on. Yeah, a bit more shadow between the fingers here. It would be in shadow naturally. Speed that up a bit. Just trying to shade down to add some contrast rather than highlighting up. Not a big fan of trying to highlight with really light greys and whites. Not on rocks anyway. Yeah. Thinned down a bit of black Templar there and just sloshed it all over. Decided it was taking a bit too long. Trying to darken the whole rock up a little bit. Magos purple here. Decided I wanted to deepen these shadows around the muscles and on the skin, like around the hands and the face. The mix I had with the red ink and the blue ink, it was doing a good job, but just wanted to more quickly add more depth to that purpley colour really. So yeah, the Magos purple out the pot, but not a heavy wash, just using it like a glaze. Probably went a bit over the top really. I could have been a bit more careful with it. But it made a real nice colour transition to quite a purpley colour on the undersides of the skin and around the face. You see it here on the face. He's going to end up looking not exactly red-faced, but it's definitely going to change the look of the model. There's 3 of these guys in the starter set, so I wanted a couple of them to have slightly more purpley faces. Also wanted to make those bright pink lips seem a bit less stark against the blue skin. Just not having a look around the model myself there, just to see which bits I think need a bit more of the glaze. Pop a bit on the kneecap, areas where the skin would stretch. tend to keep a wet brush to hand at all times, like I said, just to mop up bits that go wrong. So going back in with the original homemade blue contrast ink here, just providing a bit more shade in the areas that I think would be a little bit more shaded, you know, just under the sort of folds of the skin, up underneath the leather straps. I have hit this fur with a dry brush of white earlier, just trying to re-emphasize a bit more contrast to the shade areas. I'll try and emphasize that spine across the top of the neck and the back as well, just by running a little bit of the glaze either side of that very white ridge at the top. Just working back and forward here with a bit of the blue glaze in the shadows and the purple glaze. Mixing in some white scar into the blue mix now. This is probably the most fun I had on the whole model, which was highlighting the face. So adding in the opaque white paint to the blue ink makes a really nice, you know, fairly wet mix for kind of some light layering. Just using a fine detail brush here to add those highlights in, just really carefully, slowly. The paint's quite thin. Basically a relatively thin, reasonably light blue. If you were using like a Games Workshop paint, one of the blues, like a Lothern blue mixed with a bit of white maybe, and then probably about the same amount again of water or medium, just to thin it down quite a lot. Just a case of building up those layers. I find this the most enjoyable kind of painting, really. I just, you know, don't want to do it over the whole model. Focus this effort on the face. Maybe the hands. I don't do the hands on this guy, but you know, faces, hands, those kind of things where people notice a bit of, you know, the extra work is more noticeable. But these snow trolls have got really characterful faces, you know, the eyebrows are really pronounced, the squat nose, cheekbones are quite pronounced, and so like all, you know, the face is framed by that fur, you know, that beard, the beard fur. You know, it's quite a circular frame around the face, so I'll highlight the edges of those as well, draw the eye to the face. It's quite a change to most of the model using the contrast paints, where you're not exactly slapping them on, but you don't have to be really, really careful. You know, you do have to be careful, but not like this. Dragging the brush towards the area where I want the paint to be most pronounced. So we're highlighting, so towards the area that I want to be most highlighted. Sort of dragging it towards the center of the eyebrows there. Not eyebrows, you know what I mean, the brow of the model. It's kind of a good angle to see the purple on the underside of the skin from here as well. Just using a bit of that quite thin light blue paint to go over some of the areas where maybe I went a little bit over the top with the Magos purple. Yeah, just working in a few more layers. Adding a little bit more white to the mix as well. Being quite sparing now, this is almost pure white scar. I like the white scar because it's quite thin. I've got the game colour dead white as well, but the pot I've got anyway is a little bit thicker, so I like using that for different applications, like maybe doing the eyes where you want a thicker paint, but the Citadel white scar that I've got feels a little bit smoother, maybe a little bit more glossy as well. Yeah, I just fancied using that version of the white paint that I have. Yeah, wet brush on hand just to mop that up there. Put a bit of the white into the shadow, which I didn't want. Yeah, just being quite careful now because we're pretty much pure white. Yeah, indication now on my thumb that the paint's a little bit thicker there when I want to go in and highlight the eyes. Say highlight the eyes. They were already white, but there was a little bit of the blue showing through. It wasn't thick enough, so adding a little bit more. Yeah, it's pure white now, so just being really careful, adding it sparingly. See, it's not super thick now when I'm going back to the layering. But I am applying it sparingly, as I said. I know I've already said it, but I really did enjoy painting the faces on these guys. Some of the Mantic sculpts are a bit funky, really. Not amazing, but I think these guys look pretty cool. Yeah, just highlighting around the edge of the beard and the hair. Just provides a nice frame to the face. Just going to do a comparison now with a model that hasn't had the face highlighted. Yeah, I think it looks a lot better. So maybe 20 minutes extra work. You know, whether you consider it worth it for the tabletop, it's kind of up to you. You know, I think it's worth it. Yeah, the leather straps look a lot better on the guy on the right as well. Yeah, I think it's worth it. I've done it now, so I definitely think it's worth it. Yeah, that guy's going to win in the fight as well. I'm going to sort out this club a little bit with some little bit of highlighting, game colour real nice sort of mid-brown. Just highlighting the areas that are already sculpted into the club. Contrast paint sort of showing us where we need to highlight. Just one layer of highlights I'm using here. Contrast paint's already created some highlight and shadow. Saying one level of highlight, I just held up some Vallejo khaki, which I also used as a second highlight on that dark brown club. On this club, I'm going the other way, using some Armour brown, thinned down a little bit to glaze into the shadows. I say shadows, I mean the recesses that are already sculpted into the club and that have already come out a little bit from the contrast paint that I put on. The contrast paint that I'd based this club in was a couple of thick coats of Skeleton Horde. Using a bit of Athonian camo shade here to add a bit of interest to the rock that this guy's holding. Add a bit of green to the bottom of it. Using exactly the same glaze here to the bottom of this club, just add a bit more interest again. So yeah, I'm glad I painted the clubs differently on these two models. You'll notice that they're holding the club in a slightly different position. So there's lots of downsides of this material that Mantic used, this resticky type material, but one of the upsides is that you can heat up the pieces in boiling water, or very hot water, be careful obviously. Mould them into a different position, then put them under a cold tap, and they will stay where you've left them. So you can move the arms around a little bit, just to add some variety to the poses. Some model colour light yellow here, just to highlight the yellow on this part clothing. Not going to go over the top with highlighting on the clothing here, just a little bit on the edges, the tops of the material, where the light would catch it. Just a face and the leather straps really, and the weapons that are going to stand out the most, so just a little bit of highlighting here. Having said that, I do think it's worth it. Using exactly the same colour to highlight the orangey part of the clothing. I'm just calling it a part of the clothing. I don't really know what you call this. He's kind of got like a wrap around his waist or his thighs, and he's got the sort of like groin cloth hanging down as well. I don't know what the real, the technical terms for those are. Carefully painting the eyes with white paint. These are snow trolls, so I want the eyes just to be bright white, basically. The eyes are sculpted in quite nicely on these models, so it should be quite easy, but I do find painting eyes reasonably difficult. Do an okay job on these, not perfect, but, not too bad. Just a case of making sure the paint's not too diluted, so it doesn't flow off the brush into the socket recesses. Yeah, so these lips looked a little bit weird with just basically being really pinky purpley. So using a bit of light flesh to lighten them up a bit and just add some texture to them, just some little ridges really all along the lips. Giving them a bit of life really. And some Magos purple, just to blend all that in together around the gums. Did highlight the gums a little bit with the light flesh. It was a little bit too light, so Magos purple just sort of blends all that in, tones it down a bit. I say tones it down, like darkens it up, adds some more contrast. Yeah, that's these models finished. Let me know what you think. This guy hasn't got a huge amount of the purple glazed into his skin. I wanted them to look a little bit different between the three models because the poses are very similar. Let me know what you think. Yeah, if you like these painting videos, they're meant to be a good level tabletop. It's all about getting the project done. But yeah, if you like the videos, give us a thumbs up, leave me some comments, let me know what you liked, what could be done better. That guy there had some very glossy clothing that needs to be dulled down with some matte varnish. But yeah, if you like the videos, consider subscribing. Let me know what you think.